Hello, good day everyone. I'm Marjun Tinonga, and together with Miss Tanasas and Miss Sarim, we are going to discuss a new interesting lesson. Our topic for today is about geography. Before we start, let me read to you first the learning objectives of this lesson. At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to first discuss geography's impact on culture, provide specific examples of regional diversity, create a Venn diagram to compare and contrast rural, urban, suburban areas, and fourth, explain the factors leading to migration, describe the history and impact of globalization, and lastly, they should provide specific examples of how to incorporate students' cultural and geographic differences in the classroom. To start up with, let us define first what is geography. Geography comes from the Greek word geographia, which means description of Earth's surface. It is the study of places, cities, countries, mountains, deserts, rural areas, oceans, continents, and communities. Geographers do not only explore the physical features of the place, but also examine the economic activities of human settlement patterns. This also includes the culture of the people who live there. The places where once lived in the space or land area that has distinctive and has meaning or symbolism to the people who are living in such region. So, geography has two classification. The first one is the physical geography, which is the study of the physical features of Earth, such as climate, soils, vegetation, water, and landforms. The next one is the human geography, which is the study of economic, social, and cultural systems that have evolved in a specific location. It encompasses many of the topics that are discussed in this book, such as classicism, racism, ethnicity, poverty, language, sexual orientation, religion, exceptionalities, and age differences. Geographers uses a number of tools to record and track the physical and human geography of a place. Maps are the most common, as you probably remember from your study of geography. With today's technology, geographers are able to understand an area in great and intricate detail through the use of computers, global positioning system, GPS devices, and satellite images. Now let us move on to geography and culture. As we all know, our identities are closely linked to the geographic area in which we grow up and places we later live. However, just because we grew up in the same and similar geographic area as our neighbors or friends, it doesn't mean that we experience the place in the same ways. Some members of the community had lived there much longer than the others and have different histories, experiences that sometimes lead to the conflict with more recent arrivals. The area takes on a different meaning based on a member's race, religion, age, and language, as well as how membership in those groups is viewed by other members of the community. So, the factors that affect human behavior and experiences includes, of course, the race, ethnicity, religion, language, age, and very important is the culture. Now for the next enclosure of my coverage, we have regional diversity. Regional diversity implies diversity or differences that exist in the terms of culture, language, spoken, and food. This also includes the clothes in different regions. Regional differences become apparent to educators as they move from one area to another just to work. Sometimes local and regional differences are hardly noticeable. At the other times, they lead to a number of adjustments in the way one lives. The content can be taught in the classroom and the manner in which some interacts with the community. So, characteristic of the population and land on which people live can be used to group geographic areas with similar landscapes and histories. So, the racial, ethnic, and religious diversity varies from one region to another. So, the interests and perspectives of those who live in such geographic regions often are reflected in their stand in state and federal issues and are reflected also in the national elections. So for the first regional diversity, we have differences in education. So regional differences in education across regions are partly due to regionally diverging supplies of educational training and programs, differing admissions regulation in federal education system, and our segregated neighborhoods and the dismantling of educational infrastructures in rural areas or the expansions of private schooling in urban class. So let's have here an example. So in United States, as one travel across various regions, significant differences can be found across areas in relation to education. So individuals exploring teaching opportunities will find the average salaries in some states are considerably higher or lower than the others. So as we can see in this table, these are the different wages or salaries teacher gained in various specific regions. So the average salary is $56,689. However, in some region like in the southeast part and in Rocky Mountains, reveals that teacher's salary is below average. So such situation could affect the motivation of the educator to teach in that certain region. The occurrence of that phenomena results in educational attainment varying across the area. So therefore, the percentage of individual aging 25 and above without a high school diploma varies across the different region in the country. So now let's move on to the regional religious differences. So regional religious differences refers to the concept of having different diversity in the aspect related to religion, such as gods, rituals, practices, and culture. So it is believed that all religions are equally important and their teachings are equally relevant. Religious differences are one of the most important and perhaps the most important of the regional differences considered in United States and in other parts of the world, including Philippines. So the daily behaviors and values of an individual may have a direct correlation to the individual's religious beliefs. So the diets, values, and politics are often functions of one religion. So the study of Newport in 2014 found a significant differences in the religiosity of American people. So based on their study, people in that region are identified as 41% very religious, somewhat religious 29%, and 29% non-religious. So 10 of these regions are religious and most of them are from the south. So individuals tend to support their either liberal or conservative platforms, parties, and candidates. Now for the last part of my coverage, we have here the regional political differences. So a political region is defined by a specific government and set of rules. Countries are a great example of political regions because ev- every country is a sovereign territory with its own government. So we have here the map of US, which shows the 2012 presidential election cartography. So during that election, the conclusion of every national election maps of election results are posted in the media in the form of color-coded maps of all the states. So the maps use the traditional red for the states won by the Republicans and blue for those who are won by the Democrats. So just like in the Philippines, our 2022 elections cartographic map shows that presidential candidate Bongbong Marcos wins the majority vote of the Filipino people. So Bongbong Marcos wins the majority vote of the people, garnering 31,104,175. So these are the majority vote as of May 13, 2022. So at any moment in our history, BBM will be declared as the 17th president of the country. So that is all for my part.
Rural, urban, and suburban areas. 81% of the US population live in towns, cities, and metropolitan areas with 50,000 people or more by Procus 2014. Teaching an isolated rural area hundreds of miles from a shopping center is very different from teaching in a wealthy suburban area with access to a wide range of cultural and sporting events. Let's examine the characteristics of rural, urban, and suburban areas that may help you determine where you would like to teach. Rural areas. In 1990, a majority of Americans lived in rural areas beginning early in the 20th century. Large numbers of rural workers migrated to cities for employment. Today, rural areas are location of choice for 19% of the US population, as well as many other people around the world. People may choose to live in a rural areas because they enjoy the wide open space, the stars in the sky, and fishing, hunting, and other outdoor activities. Rural areas feature fewer people with whom to contend and the freedom to have more control of one's life. Many of us have grown up in rural areas, but a growing number have moved from cities to escape the crowding, traffic, crime, pollution, and bureaucracies of cities' life to recapture a quality of life that some believe provides a healthier environment for families, while there may be a tendency to think of rural areas as populated primarily by individuals involved in farming. Fewer than 1% of Americans farm for a living today, and 2% live on farms. Today, there are approximately 2.2 million farms in the United States. Environmental Protection Agency. Populations of rural areas. The states with the largest rural populations are Texas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia in that order. The rural population across the country is predominantly of European background. However, the majority of the 1.9 million American Indians and Alaska Natives who receive services from the Department of the Interior through the 565 federally recognized tribes live in rural areas or the U.S. Department of Interior. In recent decades, increasing numbers of Hispanic and African Americans have moved into rural areas. They are attracted to jobs in meatpacking, food processing, plants, and agriculture. Economics in rural areas. Not all is idyllic in rural living. The rural workplace earns less than its urban counterparts, and the poverty rate is higher than in other places. The poverty level is consistently higher in rural America than in urban areas in all areas of the country. Regionally, the highest poverty tends to be found in the South, followed by the West, the Northeast, the Midwest. Okay, this figure shows that poverty rates for various regions of the country from 2009 to 2013, both in metro and non metro areas. The rural economy is sensitive to fluctuations in manufacturing and export rates. Farm production can fluctuate with crop prices, which are controlled by the world economy and weather. Successful farmers today use technology and business principles as well as their knowledge about agriculture to manage a farm. In addition to watching the weather, they monitor the market to determine the best time to sell. They must have the resources to store products during times of low prices, including storage facilities and adequate finances to sustain them. The nature of the business is making it difficult for small farmers to survive. The number of individual and family farmers has decreased over the past few decades. Although families still own the majority of the farms in the country, corporation ownership is growing. Rural schools and their issues. Are you interested in teaching a rural area? There are advantages and limitations. Schools in rural areas are smaller than those in suburban and urban areas, meaning that there are fewer students to manage and a better opportunity to get to know students' families. The lower enrollment in rural schools usually results in a relatively low student to a teacher ratio, allowing more individual attention for students. One of the problems in small schools is that teachers often must teach subjects for which they are not prepared, for example, physics, chemistry, biology. Schools often do not have sufficient resources to offer foreign language classes, technology education, music, art, or advanced placement courses. However, satellite connections in some rural areas allow students to take such courses via distance learning. Proponents of solidation argue that curriculum can be expanded to include subjects that are not available in a small school. Buildings can be upgraded with educational equipments and technology, and students can be better served when small schools are combined. Nearly 150,000 schools were closed in the United States in the past century due to budget issues, busing, academic issues, and even to threaten athletic programs. Through online instruction, students in some rural schools may now have access to advanced subjects that might otherwise be unavailable, such as math, physical sciences, foreign languages, and computer science. Urban areas. Some people choose to live in urban areas because of the excitement and access to amenities such as restaurants, theater, and music opportunity. Large cities offer abundant professional jobs as well as sports complexes, numerous libraries, colleges, and universities, recreational activities, restaurants that vary greatly in cuisine and cost, and clubs with entertainment. Other people live in the city because they grow up or accepted a job there. They may choose to remain in the city because they like it or because it adequately meets the needs. Others have no choice because of family or economic obligations or just don't have the opportunity to break loose from the grip of the city. Many who live in the city have never taken advantage of their activities that attract people to the city mainly because of limited income. Geography plays a role in defining the conditions of a city. The upper middle class and the wealthy live together in one or more particular areas of the city. The middle class and low income families live in other areas of the city. And the homeless are usually shepherded into specific areas where most others will not see them. Housing in the city is more expensive than in other places, and the cost of living is usually high. A small two-bedroom condominium can cost over $50,000 or even near a city. Low rent housing is limited and often in despair. Most cities do not have enough public housing to meet their needs, and the cost of owning a car and paying for insurance on it may be exorbitant. Public buses and subway systems serves as major means of transportation. Population of a city. One half of the world's population live in the megacities. New York City is the largest city in the United States with a population of around 9.3 million, which grows to over 20 million when extended into the metropolitan area that includes its suburb. This figure shows how New York City compares in size to other major cities around the world. Cities in developing nations have limited means or resources to provide housing, sanitation, and healthy environment for their growing populations. Not all new immigrants and migrants in the United States have access to adequate and inexpensive housing, and oftentimes multiple families share very small homes or apartments. Sometimes, in violation of city ordinances, some families end up homeless. 52 metropolitan areas in the United States have over 1 million residents. They range in size from the metropolitan Newark, Jersey City area with approximately 20 million to Grand Rapids, Wyoming, Michigan with just over 1 million. The ethnic and racial diversity is usually greater in cities than in other areas, in part because many new immigrants from around the world initially settle in urban areas. Urban schools. Enrollment in the largest 100 school districts ranges from 46 and 522 in Anchorage, Alaska to 1,353 in New York City schools in School and University. Between 2001 and 2011, the number of white students in the U.S. public schools decreased from 28.7 million to 25.6 million, from 60% to 52%, since the majority of immigrants and individuals of color tend to migrate to large metropolitan areas. It is reasonable to assume that a very large number of students in most urban schools are from ethnic minority backgrounds. Hadley of 2013 suggested that in some instances, urban schools is initially a code term for poor minority schools. She indicated that on average, 64% of the students receive free or reduced price lunches, which is an indication that their families are either near or the federal poverty line. She further stated that these schools often have outdated texts, inadequate technology, and equipment, insufficient materials, and deteriorating physical plants. In addition, she said teachers are often unqualified to teach the subject matter to which they are assigned. These schools often lack advanced placement classes that would provide better students the preparation they need to be competitive in higher education admission or matriculation. Not all schools in a city are equal. Parents in middle class neighborhoods are able to donate funds to hire teachers of art and music. They can pay for tutors to ensure that their children have the knowledge and skills necessary for entry into the desirable colleges and universities. California has a system of private foundations that support local school districts. Suburban areas. In 1930s, a relatively small number of Americans lived in the suburbs. Today, over half of the population lives there. After World War II, the suburbs offer an opportunity to own a single-family house with a yard in an area that seemed safer than the city and more desirable for raising children. The wage earner, usually the father, and the time commuted to the city to daily work. Most wives stayed at home to care for children and become involved in the developing community. Development of the suburbs. The desire for home ownership was one of the primary reasons for the development of suburbia, with a minority of families unable to afford homes in many U.S. cities in the mid 20th century. Lower cost suburban developments become an attractive alternative. Low interest loans to returning veterans enhance the opportunities for many more families. Most of the suburbs during the 1920s were racially and economically homogeneous, while African Americans established their own suburbs in a few places. Neither they nor members of the other ethnic groups of color were encouraged to settle in the suburbs. Racist governmental policies and business practices at the time exacerbated racial and class inequalities and kept suburbia almost exclusively white. At the same time, programs for public housing, urban renewal, and replacement of homes with highways were undermining the stability of and privacy of African American neighborhoods in the cities. In addition, African Americans were being denied mortgages to buy their own homes. Software, electronic, and biotechnology companies found suburban business centers to be ideal for their development and research. They attracted entrepreneurs and professionals who made scale housing developments near their jobs. These office and research parks begin to interact academically and economically with research universities and both public and private groups to develop and use their products. Silicon Valley, south of San Francisco, is the center of much of the US high-tech industry and an example of suburban business and research complex. Suburban schools. The quality of school is often one of the reasons that families move from cities to suburbs. Because the suburbs are fairly new, their schools are usually not in despair, as are many in the urban areas. While these suburbs are more likely to have a beautiful school with the latest technology, qualified teachers, advanced placement courses, gifted and talented programs, and numerous extracurricular activities. However, not all suburban schools are of this high quality. Those that predominantly serve students with limited English skills from low income families and from backgrounds other than Europe are likely to be the older schools in the region, lacking in facilities, new equipment, and advanced technology. These schools may find the recruitment of teachers challenging. Migration. Throughout history, the people have been on the move. They voluntarily move across international borders and within their own countries for educational and work opportunities. However, many are also forced to move for political and religious reasons. We have seen millions of refugees fleeing war torn regions such as Syria, Central Africa, and Ukraine. Others are forced to leave their homes and seek refuge because of climatic conditions. Rising sea level has placed large populations at risk of flooding. The Pacific island nation of Kiribati is experiencing a rising sea level that is threatening its very existence. Kiribati has recently purchased land in Fiji to move its residents should sea flooding force them to leave. Droughts and extreme weather, such as hurricanes and tornadoes, have forced individuals to find safer locations. Brimner and Hunter of 2014 suggested that there are 230 million international migrants, and when global warming takes hold, millions more could be affected by future climate change. Geography doesn't just determine whether humans can live in a certain area or, or not, it also determines people's lifestyles as they adapt to the available food and patterns. As humans have migrated across the planet, they have had to adapt to all the changing conditions they were exposed to. Geography helps us understand why certain locations are ideal for living and why others are not. To better understand why and how global interdependence has grown, technological breakthroughs in transportation have not only made this world smaller, but have also created societies that depend on external resources. That's all, thank you.
So, the next subtopic to be discussed is globalization. So, what is globalization and what does it have to do with geography? As we all know, geography is the study of places and the relationship of people and their environment, the relationship of the people. So, how do we build relationship? Yes, it is through globalization. Globalization refers to intensified geographical movements across national borders of commodities, people seeking employment, money and capital investment, knowledge, cultural values, and environmental pollutants. So, in globalization, people move from one place to another, from one country to another country. Same goes to our products and goods. We trade our products to other countries and vice versa. The early stages of globalization occurred when European nations began to colonize the Americas, Africa, and India in the late 15th century. While the colonizers follow a policy called the Manifest Destiny, in which they considered their culture as the superior, while the cultures of the colonized countries are considered inferiors. Of course, the cultures of the strong one should be considered as superiors. It was until after the World War II that many countries were able to become independent from their colonizers. But the colonizers quickly centralized their power in 1984. They centralized their power through establishing the GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Taxes, which later became the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. With a membership beyond the European colonizers, the goal of the WTO was to reduce barriers of trade so that the goods and labor could move more easily across national borders. So yes, it was through the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization take the control in our trading system. So under globalization, here is economics. Economic issues influence our daily lives. This includes issues such as tax and inflation, rates, interest rates and wealth, inequality and emerging markets, and energy and environment. So events in one country can affect other countries around the world. For example, if there will be an adjustment in the Philippine stock market, of course, the companies owned by other countries, maybe the companies under that stock market will be affected as well. The whole companies will be affected. So our economy today is now starting to foster. It has dropped since the pandemic started. So thanks to technology, we are able to open the businesses. The trading as well is now good, and but it was closed. The infrastructures was closed. All the businesses was closed due to pandemic. But since we have we discovered the new technology, the modern technology, we are now able to trade our products. We are now able to communicate again, to connect to other countries. So technology is both changing the job market and opening communications across national borders. It provides opportunities to connect people around the world. The use of computers and cellular phones around the globe has increased dramatically over the past decades. So yes, it has increased dramatically over the past decades. Even in school, we use technology, we use gadgets, we use gadgets for us to learn, for us to communicate with our teachers, with our classmates, and whoever we want to communicate with. Next is environment. A number of factors contribute to the degradation of the environment and the world's ecosystem. As the world's population increases, the needs for food, clean water, sanitation, and jobs also increase. Another factor is the increased consumption of natural resources and produced goods by the populations of industrialized countries. So the environment is also greatly influenced by global conditions, changes, and decisions. A volcano, an explosion, a fire, or an spill in one country can impact the environment and economy of many other countries, as ash or other pollutants are spread by wind or water around the earth. So yes, since we rely on our environment, our economics, the globalization as well, will be affected if something will happen to our environment. Yes. Next is the resistance by indigenous people. So how does the resistance of the indigenous people affects the globalization? As we all know, not all people are excited about the globalization that is opening up the world to the interests of corporations, investors, and politicians. Indigenous people are only 5% of the world population, but some are living on natural resources that others desire. Today, groups of indigenous people are fighting in courts and public forums for their rights to sovereignty, self-governance, and collective ownership rather. Many do not want to assimilate into the dominant society. The 5%, that 5% barely have voice to speak up, to fight for their rights. Those indigenous people, those who live in the mountains, for example, rely on our natural resources. The natural resources are their source for food, their source of income, their source of living. So, for example, mining. If there will be a mining, of course, the natural resources will be affected. So those people living in the mountains will be affected as well. So that's why those people, those indigenous people, don't want mining. We want our country to be at par with other countries. Yet we don't want our natural resources to be affected. But the globalization, meaning we um all the all the things here in our country will be affected. The natural resources, the environment, the economy, everything will be affected. So next is incorporating students' cultural and geographic differences into the classroom. People move from one place to another. Therefore, diversity in community is inevitable, especially in a classroom. So it is inevitable to have an immigrant student. So how can we incorporate our students' cultural and geographic differences into the classroom? First, teaching immigrant students. In teaching immigrant students, you should be conscious. The teacher should be conscious of the ethnic identification of immigrant students. They may be at very different stages of assimilation, which means they cannot be thought of as a homogeneous group. Some students will identify strongly with the dominant group. Others will be transcultural or successful in figuring out how to fuse the culture of the dominant society with their native culture. Still, other students will strongly identify with their native cultures and even resist or develop opposition to the dominant culture. If you understand where they are, you can better understand how to use their native cultures to help them learn and possibly counter their opposition to academic achievement. So yes, it is hard for an immigrant student to cope up or to go with other students. So as a teacher, you should be conscious of their ethnic identification. You should help them counter their opposition to academic achievement. Next is honoring family cultures. Students' cultural backgrounds should be reflected in the examples used to teach. Rural students do not relate to riding a subway to school or work, nor do inner city students easily relate to single family homes with large yards and no other houses around them. It would be hard to relate to a story in a book about a father who is a pilot if you have never been close to an airport, of course. A teacher who understands the experiences of students from different cultural backgrounds can use that knowledge to help students learn subject matter. A teacher's sensitivity to those differences can be used to make students from oppressed groups feel as comfortable in the class as those from the dominant culture. So, yes. Next is incorporating global perspective. Because our world has become so interdependent and will become even more so in the future, it is important that The students have an understanding of global connections and how they impact their lives. As you plan lessons, think about how you can integrate worldwide events and actions. Natural disasters such as a tsunami, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption rather, provides an opportunity to learn about the part of the world in which the disaster occurred, the people affected, and the implications for the United States and even for them in particular. So you have to let them discover, let them know the global perspectives. You should be, yes, you should let them learn global connections and how those connections impact their lives. So another strategy for incorporating global issues into the curriculum is to help your students think about topics from the perspective of different classes of people in another country. Their perspectives on an issue could be the same or quite different from those of students in your classroom. Using the internet, using the internet, your students can connect to students in classrooms around the world. Some schools connect their students as pen pals to students in other countries. I remembered I remembered my elementary days. I think I experienced this one. Students in different countries could work together on projects to learn more about each other or an issue or a project in which both countries are engaged. Students from all kinds of schools participate in exchange programs with families around the world. around the world. Teachers sometimes sponsor trips for students to visit other countries. The possibilities for interacting with people from other countries will continue to expand as we increasingly use technology to work together. So, for us as a future educator, we should know that to incorporate our students to global perspective, it is important to have a technology. It is important for us to introduce technology to our students. Next is working with families and communities. Teachers need to listen to parents and participate in the community to develop a range of teaching strategies that are congruent with the home cultures of students. Parents can learn to support their children's learning at home, but may need concrete suggestions, which they will seek from teachers who they believe care about their children. Educators must know the community to understand the cultures of families. Yes, as a teacher educator myself, we should know how to communicate with other families. We should talk to the parents. The teachers should talk to the parents of their students and as well as the communities. So all of those are the factors affecting globalization and yes, affecting the globalization. So that should be all. I think we met all our lessons objectives. So that should be all. I think we met our lesson objectives so far. So that should be all. Thank you and God bless.